Julio Nakpil is a Filipino revolutionary soldier and Filipino composer who lived through the 19th century and 20th century in Philippine music history. Interesting is that he was a contemporary of Jose Rizal and a member of La Liga Filipina and Philippine Masonry, and also of Andres Bonifacio's Katipunan when it was already a revolutionary government.
I find his music quite interesting because it contains this nationalistic spirit. Although he has borrowed from Western elements in terms of his harmonies, his melodies were quite tonal, but they were not the usual smooth kind of a legato or something. So in other words, there was a little awkwardness in the transition from one section to another.
He had very little training in music, but he was able to compose considerable musical works.
You keep saying 2 years of schooling lang, no formal education, blah, blah, blah. To me, it's very simple. It's a gift.
His music was very representative of Filipino sensibility and sentimentality, particularly music that was of that particular period in Philippine music history.
On May 22, 1867, Julio Nakpil was born in Quiapo, one of Manila's busiest districts. He was fourth among the 12 children of Juan Luna Nakpil and Juana Garcia Putco. His father Juan was a flute player and a member of an orchestra. Julio was sent to school when he was 8 years old. Highly imaginative and precocious, he was not able to conform to the strict discipline and was pulled out of school after only 2 years of education. Julio was largely self-taught as a musician, but he made up for that lack with diligent practice. He became so good as a pianist that the Spanish governor Eulogio Despujol of 1891 to 1893 often invited him to Malacanang to perform in social gatherings like tertulias and bailes. Julio was paid 1 peso per hour, which was a very high rate at that time. He was in great demand that his health declined due to often staying up late at night. This left him with no choice but to stop accepting the piano playing requests. Julio finished his first composition, a polka titled Zefiro, on April 27, 1888 when he was 20 years old.
Although it is a polka, it is in that predominant international style, you see already complexity in it because there are already imitations as well as the use of unconventional tonal harmonies. Although it sounds tonal, it sounds melodic.
Personally, as a pianist, I feel that it is not easy. It sounds easy, but it is not. And also, one of the distinctive features of Julio Nakpil's music was that for the pianist, it was a little awkward for me to play because many times he would modulate, or maybe not really modulate, he would change his chords dramatically. In other words, the chords that he would change to were quite unexpected. And unless you really study the piece for quite a while, you will be startled and your fingers would be confused as to where they would go.
It was the 19th century, so it was the time of the Philippine Revolution. And I was surprised to look into the entire gamut of his musical works, as he was a pioneer in this sense, because during that time, you had composers like Diego Perez, Manuel Mata, or Ramon Valdez with very little of their music that survived. But with Julio Nakpil, we were able to come up with almost a complete catalog of music with only 2 works that are actually missing and hasn't been retrieved.
This was followed by a series of 7 danza habaneras, including his most famous composition, Recuerdos de Capiz. Julio Nakpil's first published musical work was Ilang Ilang. As mentioned in his account, this was in Madrid in 1890. When capitalism and business became common practice in the 19th century, Manila became a hub for international companies seeking to profit. It was then that music stores and music publishing companies opened in the capital city. As one of the first Filipino musicians to write, publish, and sell his own music, Julio Nakpil was a pioneer in the music industry. Although his close affinity with the Western musical style was evident in his compositions, he nonetheless displayed the sensitivity of a Filipino to the social and political climate of his time.
Well, the influences that Julio Nakpil would have gotten from the West probably came from the Romantic period, specifically Frédéric Chopin, because I remember having encountered a couple of his pieces where the waltz element of Chopin was closely imitated. The character, the accompaniment style was actually very much Chopinesque. And I understand that there were also Filipino pianists or composers that had completed their works for the piano, but they did not complete, or they did not have a complete output like Julio Nakpil did. And people like Jose Estella, Manuel Mata, and Ramon Valdez were people who had also contributed some of their works towards the piano repertory.
Actually, I see that period, 1870, 1920, as the formative period of what we call urban Philippine culture. That's when the urban tradition in the Philippines really matures and starts to blossom. You can see that in painting.
During this period, when he was composing from 1888 to around 1892-93, he was composing in sort of like in very superficial, in a way. Superficial. He would represent country scenes in his Recuerdos de Capiz or Danse Campestre or Ilang Ilang, depicting flowers, depicting the breeze or the brisa or the evening breeze. But when you find in his middle period, in his nationalistic period, you see already this very nationalistic sentiment of wanting to become Filipino, wanting for something that's original. And in here, you see he did arrange lulay, folk song. You know, he had this very light and very nice transcription or arrangement of lulay, as well as the kondiman.
Parang sabay-sabay. Patria. Sila lang. Tayo,
So, talagang dinidefine niya, yung mga dissonances niya, talagang inaano niya. Like, for example, the Pahimakas, it's D minor, it starts with C sharp major, which is talagang in the, So, if talagang meant niya yung dissonance na yun, it is talagang trying to parang putting into music yung kanyang rejection of how was happening during that time. So, if it is there, you just have to bring it out.
Julio Nakpil's message in his music is actually love of country. I think that's very, very strong in his music, and this can be seen in his Amor Patrio. Amor Patrio was actually composed in 1893, and this was dedicated to Jose Rizal. It was during this time that he joined Rizal's La Liga Filipina. And it was at this time when Rizal was in Dapitan. The title Amor Patrio itself was based on Rizal's essay, no, Love of Country, when he wrote it when he was in Barcelona.
Two groups emerged from the dissolution of La Liga Filipina, the conservative Cuerpo de Compromisario and the Katipunan, commanded by Andres Bonifacio. Nakpil's active commitment to reform movements fueled his nationalist ideals and desire to fight for freedom.
Nasaan na si Mairing? Ito, hindi. Uy, wala. Ito? Durog?
Yung mga durog yung papel niya.
Pwede hindi ito. Hindi masyado to.
Ilang page ba? Isa na?
Hindi yung
Buo?
buo po.
Na marangal?
Marangal, nadalit, tagalugan.
The importance of Julio Nakpil's music is that he actually was narrating the story of the nation, of the different colonial periods, of imperial encounters and confluences. So it actually represents manifold realities of global modernity, colonialism, as well as the rise of Filipino nationalism. And you see this in the different periods in his musical development.
Julio's brother Francisco joined the Cuerpo de Compromisario, while Nakpil joined the armed struggle later. He met Andres Bonifacio on November 2, 1896, and joined him in the Katipunan. He used J. Gilio as his nom de guerre to avoid endangering his family. And in the midst of battle, he produced revolutionary music that served as a rallying cry for the Katipuneros.
You see this change of his style, wherein he'd move away from his stile brillante, this pianistic style of that particular period, moving towards compositions that are nationalistic. And you see here that he was composing already with Tagalog titles, with Filipino titles.
Like other Western composers, like Beethoven, for example, who had about 3 stages in his compositional career, Julio Nakpil also had some stages in his compositions. He started, of course, as somebody who would favor technical virtuosity. That's probably why his first compositions then were replete with runs and running passages. And then when the spirit of nationalism grew stronger, and of course we know that he became a member of the La Liga Filipina and later the Katipunan, his compositions turned to be more not only nationalistic but more revolutionary in character.
He was a pianist in Malacanang during the time of Eulogio Despujol. This Governor General, though progressive, ordered the deportation of Jose Rizal to Dapitan. He even composed El Conde de Caspe, dedicated to Eulogio Despujol. But this piece has since been lost. It is because he didn't rewrite it, possibly after the period of the Revolution. So Pamitinan was composed for the revolutionaries who took refuge in Pamitinan Cave. And Pasig Pantayanin, where the seat of Katipunan government was, no? So he did compose Pasig Pantayanin as a pasodoble to inspire, no, the revolutionary soldiers. he entered the Katipunan in 1896 and he composed the Marangal na Dalit ng Katagalugan, which is considered as the first national anthem of the then incipient Filipino nation.
In a tragic event, Andres Bonifacio was killed in 1897. He was survived by his wife, Gregoria de Jesus. Nakpil took the responsibility to look after and safeguard Gregoria as soon as he reached the government headquarters in Pasig Pantayanin.
Gregoria de Jesus was married to Andres Bonifacio, but after the death of Andres Bonifacio, Gregoria went to Pasig Pantayanin, which was the seat of Katipunan then. Julio Nakpil actually entered Katipunan as a revolutionary government already because he entered in November of 1896. And upon the death of Andres Bonifacio, it was Nakpil who actually became the Supremo of the Katipunan. And this is based on records in the Archivo General Militar in Madrid. And during this time, when Nakpil was in Pasig Pantayanin, Oriang was trying to find her way, was able to reach Pasig Pantayanin, and it was here that Nakpil took care of Oriang. And there was even a letter of Oriang to his beloved Andres Bonifacio in the handwriting of Nakpil.
Can you imagine that you are writing or transposing your wife's very deeply emotional feeling about another person, another man, her first husband?
When you go to October of 1897, Nakpil wrote a particular piece entitled Pag-ibig, a danza habanera. It is actually soliciting the love of a woman, and he was actually confessing his love for this woman. And I think this particular music was dedicated to Oriang. Then the two were married on December 8, 1898 in Quiapo, Manila.
Actually, hindi yan letter. Ano yan? Poem. Poem of Lola Gloria. She composed it expressing her sorrow, her missing Andres Bonifacio. A very emotional letter describing it was very, for me, very romantic in the sense that it showed her love and her dedication and the intensity. For me, my interpretation is that Lola Gloria and Andres Bonifacio lived in very intense times. Revolution period yun eh.
I really don't know. I have no idea why he stopped performing.
I think he stopped. This is my perception, because I never faced this question before. I presume that it was also political, that he could not stand another colonial power. It also is the period that he might have felt, because he had children to support, he might have felt that making music was not enough. And his sister, Petrona, was married to Ariston Bautista, who was the president of the Herminal Tobacco Company up north. Herminal is known to be one of the biggest tobacco factories. So he worked there for about 20 or so years.
He would not compose for 40 years after this, and I think he went to work at the Herminal factory, tobacco factory, and he would be out most of the time, going to Cagayan to tend for his family.
He used to ride horses regularly because he was a buying agent. So he would travel on horseback all the way from Manila to Cagayan Valley.
He would only compose music for special occasions. And it was in 1903, for the unveiling of the Rizal Monument and the 8th anniversary of the death of Jose Rizal, that he would compose Salve Patria. He transformed Marangal na Dalit ng Katagalugan to the symphonic ode, which is full of expectant hope and jubilant expectation of freedom. So here he was able to achieve sort of like a salvation and redemption, from the bonds of colonialism. But in reality, it was never attained. So it was his masterpiece. This was Nakpil's masterpiece, and was performed in Teatro Sorilla with 170 musicians on December 30, 1904.
I'm not sure whether Julio Nakpil was disillusioned. Remember, there was promise of independence, and this resulted in the foundation of the Commonwealth, 1935, to end in 1945. So, actually, the years late 1920s, early 1930s were a period of optimism for many Filipino nationalists.
Julio and Gregoria had 8 children, but only 6 children survived.
Julio Nakpil had 6 children that reached maturity. There were 2 that died as babies.
I am told that it was a very loving and a very quiet and peaceful relationship. They had the children to take care of, and so I would imagine it was a very happy, a very joyful family.
Yaong kamatayan siyang mapapala.
Time I remember of my Lola was in Dakota, the house of Juan. And we had a moment, just the two of us. That was the only time I remember. And that moment was I was on the floor. She was doing her nganga. She was cutting the beetle, the leaves, no? And all the nganga contraptions were there. I was on the floor, just curious, wondering what it was. And we were talking. Sabi niya, oh, ito, Mompe, oh. I tried it and I puked. You know? That was the only time. Ang sama. But then again, I could see that she was a very motherly Lola. Na she normally, an old folk would shoo away. That siya, oh, don't know what ginagawa ko. She embraced me, in effect, no, and just, okay, come and join me, see what I'm doing. You know what this is ganyan, parang ganon ang conversation namin. And I was just there, And there was one magical moment I cannot forget when my dad and my lolo were on the desk poring over some score sheets. I'm getting some goosebumps. And they would be talking. I was, in retrospect now, my commentary is like, what a magical moment. Two great minds poring over some creativity, and just, ganun ang picture ko sa kanila. And my lolo was, as you say, he was a genius, and yet he was deferring to my father. Because my father was naman, he was not seated. My lolo was seated, but my father was hunched, standing, and would be telling him they were speaking in Spanish. And my lolo would defer. He would not judge my dad. Parang he was saying, yeah, you're right. So I'm guessing, they were probably doing some arrangements because as you say, he's already created all his music, and after that, wala na. I'm guessing now, probably they were doing some arrangements. And one fateful evening, during the raid of the Americans of Manila, the bombing and everything, the Japanese army came and just took us away, and in effect, we were captured, and we were all brought to Assumption. Were you together with us at the time? We were all brought to Assumption. Yeah. We were incarcerated in the basement of a huge house of the nuns. About 300 people, no? 300. Yeah. Mga 300 daw kami, pero for 9 days. So, make a long story short, on the 9th day, I think it was, the huge wall of Assumption just started to crumble, and you could hear this tank coming in. And then we saw a white star on the tank. So nobody could figure out what is that. Japanese ba yan? American? And there were some soldiers running beside the tank. And they were pallid-faced, medyo yellowish pa. And their helmets were no longer, kasi the helmets in World War II was yung round, the start of World War II, yung round ganon, no? Like the British helmet. This time it was like ganon. Parang German, yung pala the Americans already improvised the helmet pattern after the German. Medyo ganun na. Pala namin German. So yung pala, the Americans were there thinking we were all Japanese. They started to strafe, shoot us. And all of a sudden, there was this Filipino, I can never forget his name, Mr. Mina, took off his shirt. It's supposed to be a white shirt, but it was so dirty already. Ran out and started waving. He said, Filipino, Filipino. That was the time when the Americans stopped shooting. Nobody got hurt naman. No? And that was how we were saved, because of this guy.
Towards the end of the American occupation, siguro he was grateful na na-liberate ang Filipinas. And he probably felt that the Americans were just kasi they established the education system, a form of government, health. Nag-compose siya a great symphonic musical piece. And I believe that would be his last piece.
He was able to depict his deepest longing and deepest despair, agony, because of the death of his comrades and his wife. So he would compose, for the death of his father, he composed Sueño Eterno, Eternal Dream. And when Jose Rizal was executed in Bagong Bayan, he composed Pahimakas, which is Last Farewell in Filipino.
I think it's the emotional part of it. He must have felt that there's no more drive, there's no inspiration to do it. Nawala na ang kanyang muse, si Gregoria, and the nationalism or patriotism. It's not that it died, but since it's there, nationalism is not as volatile as before. So the passion in creating or composing a music must have waned, and then he was not as physically fit anymore.
I could relate to that sadness. As I said, whenever in his resting moments, in his butaka, he's seated there with his legs propped up on the armchair.
I remember distinctly, he would sit in his sillon, in his armchair. He would look into the distance, into the Pasig.
Parang when he's looking up at the ceiling, there's a bit of sadness in his demeanor. But maybe I'm just trying to romanticize the fact that he's probably creating because I know that he's a creator. But yun, merong konting sadness. And yun nga, as he would occasionally gaze up, and he'd gaze left to the Pasig River. Long time, lingering moments, you know. That's probably where his creative juices were, working. But there's a sadness in his demeanor, as I remember. But he was a very kindly soul, generous. That whenever I asked for barya for my movies or my taho, he would always give me.
I just remember what a remark Julio Nakpil made about me when I was a boy. I was fond of reading. The other Nakpil children would be playing in the sagwan. I would still be reading the book of encyclopedia, the book of knowledge, because there was a collection in one of the rooms. So I would browse through it while the children are playing around in the sagwan. I would say, eres como un katipunero. He said, you're like a katipunero. You're always reading and reading. I was surprised the connection between being a katipunero and liking to read. I guess many other katipuneros like to read on history.
On his dying days, because of school, I was not able to visit as often. But I knew that he was not in a good condition. My mother fetched me from school. So when we got there, we went to the study room, not to the bedroom. So I was just left there. But soon enough, my mother came back and sabi niya, ikaw nga ang hindi ko maintindihan kung sinasabi ng lolo mo. Ikaw, pakinggan mo kung sinasabi ng lolo mo. So I went, and all I could hear he could not speak very well at the time anymore. Ang narinig ko, 2 de Noviembre. Maybe at the time, wala lang sa akin, pero I was probably thinking, baka nagsasabi siya, remember the people, remember our dead. 2 de Noviembre. When November 2 arrived, my mother announced to us, namatay na ang lolo niyo.
Langit ang mabuhay sa sariling bayan. Ang init ng araw, may pagmamahal. Langit ang mabuhay sa sariling bayan. Ang init ng araw, may pagmamahal. Hanap-hanap lagi saan man ako mapadpad. Di pagpapalit sa yaman ng mga dayuhan. Mahal kita, bayan kong Pilipino. Pilipinas. Sa piling mo ay may liwanag lagi ang bukas. Sa hirap man ay magtan, matukso man at maglaya.